Hello, everyone. Just make sure I got the clicker working here. Okay. All right. So firstly, I'd like to thank the organizers and hosts at Infinita City, Prospera, Rejuve.Ai. It's my second time here in Roatán, and I'm glad to be here again for this important and exciting event on longevity biomarkers. As many of you know, I'm Keith Comito, President and CEO of the Lifespan Research Institute, a 501c nonprofit which accelerates the science and systems for longer and healthier lives by uniting researchers, investors, and the public through our various programs. I am also a member of decentralized science organizations such as VitaDAO, Jellyfish, and Gitcoin. And I'm also a technology inventor, having worked with various sports and media companies, most recently Disney, where I was technology lead of advanced research, as mentioned, and where I still consult to create digital biomarker-related technologies involving face, voice, and body tracking data. And it's precisely these types of technologies I'd like to talk about today, as they have the potential to squarely address a key challenge facing aging research, which we're discussing here at this event and many other events. Namely, the need for clear biomarkers to assess biological age that are both accurate and responsive to interventions, and which can facilitate the creation of relevant indications that can be targeted in clinical trials, which can in turn accelerate the field and expedite the delivery of successful aging interventions to the public. And the key point I'd like to make regarding this is the immense value of functional biomarkers based on non-invasive data, such as audio and video data, and how prioritizing the creation of these can lead to meaningful wins quickly that are in turn able to catalyze system-wide adoption of age-related biomarkers generally. As an example of low-hanging fruit in this regard, of the over 7 million Americans currently living with dementia, an estimated 58.7 of them are either undiagnosed or unaware of their diagnosis, largely because 97% of primary care physicians don't proactively screen for this or even ask about it during checkups because, amongst other reasons, it's awkward to bring it up. And yet technology exists right now which could provide early detection based on your voice alone. And coupling this with emerging drugs that were mentioned earlier, like Leqembi, could mitigate dementia progression at the personal level and consequently be worth tens of billions of dollars to the U.S. economy. So why isn't this technology systematized in every annual checkup? In addition to chronic diseases, this diagnostic potential also maps to age-related infectious diseases as well. During the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, I worked on projects surrounding vocal diagnostics of the disease in relation to machine learning work that was coming out of MIT and other organizations that were leveraging convolutional neural networks to assess audio-based parameters like vocal cord strength, respiratory performance, muscle degradation, and even sentiment, using spectrogram analysis and techniques such as male frequency septal coefficients, or MFCC. And surprisingly, at the time, diagnostics that were deployed were much more sensitive for COVID than the antigen testing that we were using at the time compared to ground truth PCR tests, even for asymptomatic carriers, even with high specificity as well. And if you're asking yourself, why wouldn't something like this false positive on a regular cold? That's because it's not detecting phlegm or anything in your throat like that. It's simply because a disease like COVID-19 affects your neurological system, which literally changes how your vocal cords vibrate, and this can be detected. And as you can imagine, this translates to other conditions that affect your neurological system as well, such as Alzheimer's disease. Now, these voice-based examples are for downstream diseases where aging is a major risk factor, when, of course, what we're really after is comprehensive assessment of biological age itself that is based on non-invasive diagnostics. This might seem far-fetched, but is it really that hard to imagine? Human beings do this every day with our eyes and ears and the machine learning models in our brains, right? You know, ooh, she doesn't sound so good, or wow, he looks really great for his age, right? So why should it be so difficult for machine learning models to do the same? And in fact, there has been promising work developed in a variety of different non-invasive diagnostic areas in addition to voice-based, such as face and walking gait analysis, that if combined together in the right way could arrive at a purely non-invasive proxy assessment for biological age that has the added narrative benefit of being based on aspects of aging that people directly experience and care about. How do I look? How do I sound? Can I move? Can I do the things I love to do? For example, Video data is already being used to assist in the creation of machine learning classifiers for conditions such as sarcopenia, cognitive frailty, and heat stress, which intersects actually with technology in use by sports and media companies such as ESPN, for example, able to precisely track the skeletal positions of UFC fighters, for instance, even able to do things like calculate newtons of force transferred in a punch and identify the kinds of strikes that are being delivered in combat. Now, this intersection is apparent in relation to facial biomarkers as well. For example, consider the Disney Fran model used in altering the facial ages of actors in movies, which you've probably seen at least once. Because after all, what is an important first step in visually shifting someone's facial age? Understanding what age their face currently actually is, right? The goal for us is to put all of these technologies together into a multimodal data collection and analysis unit able to assess deviation between chronological age and biological age and be responsive to interventions by just analyzing face, vocal, and gait-based biomarkers. An initiative we're calling SAGE, or maybe S-Age. I'm still trying to figure out which is the catchiest version of that, so you can tell me later. And importantly, this could be engineered to collect the associated data while collecting other data in a very streamlined manner, such as survey questions and ideally additional tests such as reaction time, vibrotactile sensitivity, visual perception, these sorts of things, which were actually elements of an age meter device that we crowdfunded at Lifespan years ago on the recommendation of Dr. George Church. In clinical scenarios, such a multimodal unit could be more robust and also collect, blood-based and other biomarkers at the same time as well, which is important because, as Dr. Matt Caberlin and others on our scientific advisory board have noted, it is unlikely that any one biomarker test alone is going to do the job by itself, which was also discussed here. What we need, at least initially, is the collection of everything all together, all at once. And furthermore, assessing biomarkers of multiple modalities can facilitate interesting correlations between them and the answering of fundamental questions such as how frequently does each biomarker need to be analyzed in order to assure precision and accuracy. It sounds like a really obvious question, but in many cases this really isn't known yet. And importantly, also how well biomarkers based on comparatively easy to collect data, such as what could be accomplished on a mobile phone, compare to those that would be collected with more invasive or costly data collection methods. Answering questions like these is actually the basis of a project I worked on personally with the Chief Science Officer of Disney surrounding multimodal data collection kiosks, which can pair the collection of non-invasive data simultaneously with other types of data, such as phlebotomy, PCR testing, etc. Such units, as you can imagine, could be incredibly useful in clinical scenarios, especially if their use was standardized. And there's also an opportunity to leverage the correlations I mentioned earlier to validate diagnostics which could be used in non-clinical scenarios through, for example, a phone in your hand. Now, there are challenges to doing this, of course, such as how to capture high-fidelity information when you're not in coached lab scenarios, working with unstructured data, and using comparatively pared-down hardware. But new technologies are emerging to solve those challenges, such as real-time markerless 3D tracking for hands, face, and body simultaneously from a single mobile device, able to facilitate not only fun entertainment use cases like this, but also the detection of musculoskeletal and psychomotor parameters useful in the early detection of diseases like Parkinson's or assessment of functional fitness and decline, which is very relevant to us. And without needing multiple cameras, even wearables, or motion capture suits, or having to send pre-recorded video to a cloud service and wait for tracking data to be processed later. This can also further be bolstered by additional technologies able to overcome typical limitations with body pose analysis, for example, when occlusions or non-standard input scenarios can occur and cause erratic predictions. One of the old use cases here is when UFC fighters are grappling with each other and, the skeletal pose, as you can see, just is freaking out, right? It doesn't know what to make of that. So one such technology I worked on here was called Gemini, which combines skeletal pose tracking methods with machine learning-based system pattern recognizers. So, for example, if that pattern recognizer could identify that two human bodies were coupled in a guard, it could share that information with the skeletal pose tracker and help it resolve that confusion. And similarly, the skeletal tracker could supply information to the pattern recognizer in a circularly healing manner. Obviously, this particular use case is a different one than we might be used to here, but you can see how such approaches can be used to augment data collection for gait analysis approaches, for example, and expand tolerance for temporary moments of bad data. As a side note here, I'm a bit proud of the visual quintuple entendre we pulled off with the logo for this project, which I am quite pleased with. Switching gears on the audio side of things, one limitation to overcome in bringing clinical diagnostic power to mobile devices is that clinical approaches are typically based on analyzing specific vocal utterances, such as coughs, which not only restricts training data collection to coached lab scenarios, but this also limits the deployment of the resulting models because, for example, models trained on coughs would not work likely on passive speech. And furthermore, such approaches preclude serendipity because you already have a specific hypothesis built into your data collection model. In this case, the hypothesis being that coughs are somehow ideal to analyze. Consequently, another project that I worked on with Disney CSO is a scaffolded process of machine learning models daisy chains together that can operate on unstructured data such as normal human speech. And in this specific use case can automatically segment vocal data into phoneme subgroups, testing them all in parallel without making any assumptions as to what phoneme would be best, overcoming the earlier described limitations and broadening potential data collection scenarios to include passive speech from regular mobile devices. Now, I'm mentioning Disney quite a bit in these examples, and this is not only because of my experience leading R&D projects with them for several years, but also because of an important point worth underlining here. Technology and media companies already possess advanced technologies that are relevant to us, and they can leverage unique co-development mechanisms that can allow entertainment-related IP with health-related applications to sometimes be freely licensed or donated to these fields of use, often in collaboration with standards organizations like NIST and the American Society of Testing Materials, or the ASTM, that are able to align the effort of various organizations together to create standards which can then be published, enforced by organizations like the FDA, and then used as a basis for clinical indication. So in many ways, I think this is a key, missing piece of the puzzle that we haven't focused on yet, the involvement of these types of standards organizations. And as a quick aside on the importance and role of such initiatives, it's instructive to describe part of what went non-optimally during the COVID-19 defense a few years ago, which I was a part of. When COVID-19 hit, Disney was in a particularly tough spot, as you can imagine, given all the physical venues involved in the operations, theme parks, sporting events, etc. And as a consequence of that, almost every mitigation strategy you can think of was explored, including spread prevention tactics like, masks, of course, and the NBA bubble, if anybody remembers that. It wasn't a literal bubble like that. And diagnostics such as those based on wearables, antigen testing, etc., all of which proved to be remarkably less effective than one would have hoped, with antigen testing, for example, only having sensitivity in the 40 to 60% ranges, performing much worse for asymptomatic carriers as well. And all of that is what led us to investigate voice as a detection strategy, as described earlier. And at this time, many groups, such as the one from MIT mentioned previously, were working on this in relation to COVID-19. And at Disney, we had interfaced with a variety of such groups, universities like MIT, US government initiatives, international and foreign groups, the Indian government, for example. And two surprising things jumped out right away. One, these groups, in many cases, didn't even know each other existed, even within the US government. And two, as a consequence of that, they were all collecting slightly different data sets for no scientific reason. This, in turn, led all of their machine learning models failing to achieve the necessary accuracy when it would have been the most useful, due in part to not having sufficient data to train them on. To give a very concrete example of this, some groups were working on frequency-based analysis, such as looking at the resonance inherent to coughs or certain phonemes like the sound And as such, they would be collecting data geared for this type of analysis. For example, the Harvard sentences, specific sentences that are rich in every phoneme, in addition to, survey data like age, sex, medical history, etc. And alternatively, some groups were working on linguistic-based analysis, which could be a flag for brain fog, David was talking about earlier, and cognitive impairment. And as such, we'll be collecting a different type of data. For example, asking a patient to describe a picture in as detailed language as possible, in addition to collecting that same type of survey data. In each of these cases, the collected data sets were being used to train different types of machine learning models. Spectrogram analysis using techniques like Mel frequency septum coefficients in the case of frequency data, and automated linguistic models in the case of that linguistics data. And importantly, because those working on frequency analysis did not collect data such as those unscripted picture descriptions, and because those working on the linguistics data did not collect coughs or the Harvard sentences, their respective data were not useful to each other's analysis. Whereas, I'm sure as you can see, if both had just collected a standardized and comprehensive data set that would have taken just a little bit longer with each of their patients, all of them would have been able to have useful data that would have bolstered their individual analysis and not impinged on anyone's proprietary approaches. Doing this is not complicated. It just requires standardization and cooperation. And in this case, if this was done years ago during the peak of COVID, I believe it likely would have contributed to countless lives being saved by just, simple organizational change. And in this case, this led us to reach out to the ASTM to create a task group on physiological biomarker-related data collection, of which I'm the chair, to address exactly these sorts of issues, with an aim of arriving at a non-invasive diagnostic unit able to collect multimodal data in a standardized manner that can pave the way for targetable clinical indications for age-related functional decline. With the roadmap essentially being uniting technologies across fields to develop multimodal data collection and analysis units, create mobile device versions, precisely understanding the relative fidelity between these and clinical units, working with organizations like NIST and ASTM to codify related standards that can in turn promote the adoption of clinical indications for functional age by the FDA, which can then be targeted in clinical trials. As you can imagine, this could also naturally pair with initiatives that were mentioned earlier, such as the ARPA-H Prosper program that is seeking to develop a highly accurate and notably easy to measure metric that quantifies age-associated health changes and responds to interventions. And the X Prize Health Span Prize, which could potentially benefit from additional and comparatively quick ways to assess competing projects with regards to improvement in functional age. Now, to do all of this correctly is quite the undertaking, as you can imagine, requiring field-wide collaboration. And here's a very rough example of what that can look like, leveraging the collaboration of our various allies and unique co-development relationships, as mentioned earlier, with major tech companies. But separating out and starting with attaining a clinically relevant biomarker for non-invasively detectable functional age, or whatever we want to call it, can also allow us to move much quicker than tackling the entire gamut of all potential biomarkers, and have the unique advantage, again, of assessing aspects of aging that have an immediate, tangible meaning to people. Success with this would be of great value, not only to researchers and the public, but also to startup companies and big pharma, because if there were a kiosk, for example, able to collect all needed data easily in a few minutes, and the use of this became systematized and standardized in all clinical trials, it could essentially turn every clinical trial into an aging trial, kind of by accident, and give every therapy or drug play an additional indication it might serendipitously succeed on, increasing everyone's shots on goal. Furthermore, reliable mobile diagnostic units can also pave the way for true decentralized science, which I've spoken about at length in previous talks and won't retread too much here, other than to note the ability to have standardized metrics collected from thousands of participants, also like Jasmine was talking about, can enable new kinds of clinical trials, which can leverage combinatorial approaches regarding dosing variations and intervention combinations, while still retaining the statistical power you need through those large participant sizes. This can be especially relevant in cases where the therapeutic itself can be software-driven or digital in nature, such as with our own Mindset project at Lifespan Research Institute, which utilizes machine learning to facilitate adaptive, non-invasive potential interventions for dementia. I mentioned this a bit in the panel yesterday, which also, as you can imagine, has the power to be uniquely inspiring to the public, which again I mentioned before, as if after decades of work and $1 trillion spent against dementia yielding little results, if an online participant group using stimulus deployed on their phones like light and sound are able to reverse or even mitigate Alzheimer's at all, that would be an earthquake, potentially catalyzing a shift towards participant-led clinical trials, decentralized clinical trials, that can also speak to the needs of the present moment where the average person, at least in the US, is losing faith that existing healthcare systems will take care of them. I think there's something very powerful and inspiring to say you don't have to wait for trickle-down therapies if you are a part of building them together from the bottom up. And in relation to infinite games, it's worth noting that such approaches are readily combinable with blockchain technologies and gaming projects, some of which I've spoke about in the past, such as a philanthropic roguelike game based on the fable of the Dragon Tyrant, which is well known, at least in our field, a metaphorical story by the philosopher Nick Bostrom regarding our relationship to disease and death and how we might fight them. Specifically, what if in a game such as Dragon Tyrant, as you progress through the dungeon and get closer and closer to defeating the Dragon Tyrant, the metaphor for aging, the game itself were to take on some of these audio-visual stimuli modalities, potentially fighting the Dragon Tyrant in your own body. And since a game like this would need to be immutably tracking things like decision-making speed longitudinally, that's a cognitive biomarker. So, if we were to structure a game so that this happens, but only for a subset of players, with the other players receiving sham stimuli instead, that starts to sound like a recipe for a decentralized clinical trial administered through a game. And furthermore, this could even be combined with other types of biomarkers, like those being collected here, and other game-related technologies I've spoken about in the past, such as specific types of dynamic NFTs, which can change based on philanthropic contributions, or biomarker data, which I've called proof of philanthropy and bioavatars, respectively, truly closing the loop, the gamification loop on incentivization of healthy actions in users. Imagine if there was a huge prize pool in this game. You could win $1 million if you're the first person to kill the Dragon Tyrant, but your character becomes stronger if you are taking care of your health, giving you an edge. Things like this. It's a much more user-serving model than some of the other exploitative dopamine hacking game loops that certain games that you probably know and love employ. These are just a few examples of how emerging digital biomarker technologies can potentially transform your phone into the clinic of the future. And while obviously this was just a quick overview, for Mindset, Sage, and Dragon Tyrant initiatives in particular, we have clear roadmaps, next steps, exciting potential collaborators with MOUs, and are only limited by resources with significant milestones that would be able to be achieved for just a few $1 million total in each case. So if you'd like to see any of these projects move forward or drive forward our other programs at Lifespan Research Institute, please come talk to me. We're equipped to receive stocks, donor-advised funds, crypto, you name it. And nonprofits like us, of course, need your support in these interesting times, not only to drive forward paradigm-shifting technologies and research uniquely accomplishable by nonprofits, such as foundational research into understanding and addressing senescent cell accumulation and mitochondrial dysfunction, but also to support educational and outreach initiatives, such as our news outlet on Lifespan.io that some of you probably read, collaboration videos with large YouTube channels like Course Gesagt, which engage millions of people regarding the science and societal benefits of aging research, and our new public longevity group initiative combining machine learning and sentiment modeling to assess societal views on longevity, predict narrative risks, and help us all design precision messaging to accelerate broad adoption of aging research. Essentially non-invasive biomarkers for public sentiment. And through public engagement initiatives like these and ecosystem building initiatives like our education program and Longevity Investor Network, which investors can freely join to hear pitches from curated startups in the field and our own forthcoming spinouts, come talk to me. We've been working for many years to make the ground fertile for everyone in the field and thereby create more investors, more companies, more available resources to support you all by doing all we can to educate and convince the world to prioritize this incredibly important work. And one great way to support all of this is by joining our Lifespan Alliance, a growing consortium of mission-aligned organizations that believe in the force-multiplying power of our work and who are afforded various opportunities to engage more deeply in our mission, such as sponsoring our events and crowdfunding campaigns, priority in amplifying on-mission initiatives through our large-scale news and video channels, and the ability to collaborate on paradigm-shifting initiatives such as those discussed in this talk. So please use this QR code to learn about the Lifespan Alliance, links for general donations, and our news outlet to help anyone get informed and involved however you can. And I think that's all I have time for, but if you're interested in learning more or in becoming Iron Man or shooting lasers out of your eyes in the pursuit of longevity, please come find me and I can show you some things on my phone. Thank you.